This is part 2 of your practice test. So this goes with our chapter 2, negative numbers in the number line. And again, it's my second video to go with this. It's on page 2 of your practice test. Again, we had class work time today to get this started. If you were my Monday block and my other classes, get to see this tomorrow. And then it's due again this week when we go to take our test. But we're talking about our chapter 2 practice test and negative numbers and the number line. We're turning to the second page here, and we kind of want to zoom in here a little bit and see what they're asking us to do. So this bold print text is an important feature again when it comes to test taking or really any worksheets with Math in Focus. It's an indicator that I have directions. Write a statement to describe each inequality. Well, here it says negative 50 degrees Celsius is greater than negative 85 degrees Celsius. I really could just put that in word form. I could say negative 50 degrees Celsius is greater than negative 85 degrees Celsius. But that's not very original, is it? It's fine, it'll get you points. But this idea of greater than really describes a situation in the real world when it comes to temperatures. Well, if I have a temperature that is greater than, it's also warmer than. So another way of stating this would be negative 50 degrees Celsius is actually warmer than negative 85 degrees Celsius. You might want to think about turning this around. Some students are going to say negative 85 degrees Celsius is colder than negative 50 degrees Celsius. And this would be an important thought, that if I flip the numbers around, I need to flop the inequality. So I need to change my wording to go with that. This is maybe just a thought in case it's a multiple choice aspect of your test, that if they asked you to find the inequality that is true or best matches the situation, you would want to choose this one. If nothing else is available, that seems to make sense. You can definitely turn around your number values and then just remember to flop your sign with it. So 3 different possibilities here. Now we'll take a look at number 10 real quick. It says negative 120 feet is less than negative 72 feet. Okay, I could just put that in word form here. Negative 122 feet is less than negative 72 feet. Less than. I just read it exactly the way it was, and I just put it in word form. But is there something else that would mean this? What's another word that I could plug in instead of less than? Some other terminology that would make sense. I could say negative 120 feet is maybe below or lower than negative 72 feet. I could even say negative 120 feet is more negative than negative 72 feet. Lots of possibilities here again, but we'll just go with this one. And again, keep in mind that if it were multiple choice one day, they could turn around your values. They could say negative 72 feet, and they could say is more than or greater than negative 120 feet. Ran out of room for that. But again, just thinking that if they flip the number values, you have to flop your inequality sign, which also means I need to flop my words from less than to more than, only if those numbers are switched around. Let's take a look at this next section for problem solving. So these tend to be the application problems that are a little more challenging and worth a few more points on our test. So the first section says solve, show your work. The table shows the average surface temperatures of 4 planets. I see my planets are Neptune, Earth, Jupiter, Mars. Their temperatures are listed here. I notice there are 3 negative temperatures and 1 temperature above 0. Part A, write an inequality to compare the temperature of Jupiter and Mars. Jupiter and Mars. Well, I'm just writing an inequality. I can really use a greater than or a less than symbol, or maybe even an equal symbol if it's true. So let's take this idea of Jupiter's temperature, a negative 150 degrees Celsius, and let's compare it to the negative 53 degrees Celsius that goes with Mars. Jupiter and Mars. Well, what would be true here? They're both negatives, so I have to decide which one is closer to 0, which one is worth more, or on a number line, which one is farther to the right. So I know they're both back here, but first I'd run into negative 53, and then a long time later I'd run into a negative 150. And even a vertical number line might make sense with us because it's talking temperature. Well, I noticed the negative 150 would be quite a ways to the left. It must be less than. Negative 150 is less than negative 53. I don't think we'd count this wrong if you were missing the labels on here. They're just asking me to compare the temperatures. So again, an inequality symbol showing me the values that came from the table with the correct symbol would be true. What if you thought to turn around these numbers? What would happen in this situation? Well, remember, if I flip the numbers, I must flap the sign. So it was a less than. This would make it a greater than situation. Oh yeah, negative 53 is a better situation or greater number than negative 150. Let's try this. Part B, it says I need to order my planets from greatest to least temperature. The greatest temperature. Oh, another way of saying that would be the warmest. All the way to the least temperature. Oh, that'd be coldest. Coldest temperature. And notice it says order the planets. So I don't just want to look at their temperatures. I want to actually put the planets in order. So who has the warmest temperature here? Remember, there was only one positive. There it is, Earth. Who would come next? Well, I have a lot of negatives to look at, but if I'm moving backwards on the number line, I'm going from warmest to coldest. I'm really starting from maybe my positives up here. I'm passing 0, and I'm moving to my negatives down below. So kind of thinking of this vertical number line setup. So below 0, who would I run into first? Well, negative 53. So that goes with Mars. Well, then I have Jupiter or Neptune, and I know that if I kept moving negative, the first negative I would run into would be negative 150. So that goes with Jupiter. And last, Neptune seems to have the coldest temperature. It's the most negative temperature, so that makes sense to me. This is the order they're asking for. Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Neptune. It would be okay if you weren't sure to include the temperatures with these. I could, for instance, say 14 degrees Celsius for Earth. I could write negative 53 degrees Celsius for Mars, and so on, if I wanted to, just to make sure that I've answered all pieces of the question. Sometimes that's a safe way to make sure that you've covered all parts. This next one has to do with oceans and elevations. So let's kind of tune in here and see what number 12 is asking us to do. The table shows the average elevation of 3 oceans. The Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Arctic Ocean. They all have negative elevations, and it looks like it's labeled in meters. Okay, what do they ask? Part A, which ocean has a greater depth? Pacific Ocean or Atlantic Ocean? I know from working with students today that this word greater kind of threw them off because it says greater depth. It doesn't say which has the greater number or the greater value, which one's worth more. It says which one is the greater depth. Another way of saying that would be which is the deepest, okay, or the deeper ocean. Well, I want to compare Pacific to Atlantic. Pacific is here, Atlantic is here. Well, I have two very negative numbers. They're both into the thousands, but which one is farther away from 0? Which one would be extremely deep or down below sea level? The answer here would be the Pacific Ocean. If you were to set up an inequality symbol, they don't ask you to, but we could write an inequality to make this true. Oh, I have 2 negatives, and we know the negative closer to 0 is worth more, so the inequality symbol would say less than. Well, the one that's less than must be deeper than, or have a greater depth, or be the deepest. So in this case, we want to answer Pacific Ocean. Notice it said which ocean, so I want to give you an ocean name. Part B, which of the 3 oceans has the least depth? Least depth. Well, it's not saying which one is worth the least. It's not talking about the number value exactly. It's talking about which one is the most shallow. Shallow. Or maybe closest to sea level. So sometimes I think it's helpful to take their wording and replace it with something that I think would make more sense. So I'm trying to picture which of these sea levels is closest to 0. Which of them is the shallowest or the least deep? Well, my choices, it says I can choose from all 3. So I'm going to take a look here. Lots of negatives, but the negative that seems closest to 0 is sitting right here. This is only a negative 1,000 in some meters. This is a negative 3,000, a negative 4,000. Those are definitely much deeper. So to look for the closest to sea level or the least depth, that has to go to the Arctic Ocean. Arctic Ocean. And if I wanted to say why, because it is closer to 0, or sea level, you might say. So just kind of proving my thinking here. I can do that with an inequality sometimes. I can do that also in word form. I'm just showing you that it wasn't an eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I guess an ocean let me go. Part C. What is the difference in elevation between the shallowest ocean and the deepest ocean? Didn't I just find those a minute ago? The shallowest ocean. Oh yeah, right here. The least depth, or the shallowest. And the deepest ocean. Oh, right here. The greater depth, or deepest we wrote. So I'm comparing Pacific to Arctic. I really want to draw myself a quick number line over here, and I'm going to make it look vertical because oftentimes when we talk about sea level, that makes the most sense. Well, I know I could have 0 on my number line. That would be like sea level. And I want to get Pacific and Arctic on here because it says shallowest and deepest, and I already found those, right? The shallowest, again, I saw in Part B was the Arctic. And the deepest, again, I saw in Part A was the Pacific. So they're kind of guiding me to use those two oceans again in Part C. So I want to show this on my number line. Over here, I need to move to a negative 1,050 meters for the Arctic. So I'm going to put a point here and call this a negative 1,050 meters. And I might put an A here, that's the Arctic. I'd also say, notice that I moved down on my number line or below 0 because negatives are below 0. They are less than 0 or lower than 0 on a vertical number line. Well, next if I were to plot Pacific, because again, that's the deepest ocean. The Pacific Ocean's a negative 4,300. That's even lower on my number line. So I'm going to move down here quite a ways, put a point and call that negative 4,300 meters. And I'm going to put a P here for Pacific Ocean. They're asking what's the difference in elevation. They're really asking what's the difference between these two numbers. So over here, I might kind of put myself a question mark and draw myself a bracket saying I'm trying to figure out the difference. Well, do you notice that these both land on the same side of 0? They're both negative numbers. So to find their difference, I really can do a subtraction. I really can say I'll take the Pacific Ocean and find its distance from 0, and I'll take away the Arctic Ocean's distance from 0. Notice I'm using absolute value bars because we're talking about distance, and distance is always positive. We're talking about their elevations and a distance from 0. So I think we could probably do this more easily if we were in positive numbers instead of negative numbers today. So 4,300 jumps would get me to that Pacific Ocean, and 1,050 jumps would get me to the Arctic Ocean. Notice this is a subtraction happening here because I'm comparing the two numbers. It's a difference between the two of them. Well, I might have to stack these up real quickly and see what we get. 0 take away 0 is 0. 0 take away 5 requires me to regroup a little bit, doesn't it? So 10 take away 5 is 5. 2 take away 0 is 2. And 4 take away 1 is 3. Looks like there's a difference of about 3,250 meters. 3,250 meters. That makes sense to me. If I was at about 1,000 meters underwater or below sea level, and I moved another 3,000 meters or so, I would definitely be near that 4,000 negative mark, right? That negative 4,300 meters sounds reasonable to me. Notice that because these happened on the same side of the number line, they both end up using subtraction, or we use subtraction after we find the absolute value of both. This ends page 2 of our practice test. The next thing we're going to tackle in part 3 is the last little piece here, which you'll have to be kind of familiar with because our test is happening soon. So we'll pause right here and you can watch part 3 if you need to.